I'm Becher Townshend and welcome to FontCast, Tasmania's top-rating politics podcast. I'm joined today by my business partner, Brad Stansfield.
Hello.
And coming still out of his deathbed, Dave Killick, Mercury chief political reporter.
Rumours of my demise are only slightly exaggerated.
Only slightly premature.
He has put a jacket on. It's 30 degrees in here. Yeah.
And also Mary Massina, Managing Director at our good friends and show sponsor, Enterprise Marketing and Research Services.
Hello.
Well, have we got a treat for you today?
Yes, we have.
We have what we believe to be the first ever publicly released polling into the Macquarie Point Stadium. There it is. And also a first look at what Tasmanians think of the new policy announced on this show last week by the week before last actually, by the Premier himself to limit third-party appeals. There you go.
They'll get the tinfoil hats out, won't it?
I tell you, they'll be out in the streets with their clipboards, put down their bike counting and come and have a word. Let's start with the stadium. Mary, what did you find?
Look, EMRS recently conducted polling into whether Tasmanians supported the proposed stadium at Macquarie Point in Hobart as part of our omnibus.
Yep.
It was a simple yes, no, unsure question. Do you support the proposed stadium at Macquarie Point in Hobart?
So it's pretty unambiguous, that one.
Yep, pretty straightforward, straight back. The headline was 1,000 Tasmanians were polled, with 59% indicating that they did not support the stadium, with only 36% indicating support, with a tiny 4% being unsure.
Wow.
All right, so 59% against.
Correct?
I'd ask Sam to write it down, but he'll get the numbers wrong like he did that time at the FontCast. 36% for, 36. Tiny undecided is basically none because everyone's got a view on the stadium, including all of us. Pretty ugly numbers, my view, but I've seen worse in private polling. That's actually a bit of an improvement. I've seen numbers sort of 18 months ago, or a year ago, at the time of the last election, around sort of 70% against. So that's interesting.
It is actually, and you might be surprised to learn that this lack of support is greater in the north and the south of the state.
I'll be damned.
Surprise.
Yeah.
Look, the north and the northwest of the state, 67 and 65% respectively, oppose it. Now, looking from an electorate perspective, Braddon 65%, Bass 64%, Lyons 63%. Were more likely not to support the proposal.
So that'd be the three most marginal seats we win elections in Tasmania in?
Yep.
Okay.
Correct.
Got it, yep.
And then followed by Clark at 55% and Franklin at 48%.
Yeah.
Franklin under 50%?
Yeah, there you go.
Opposed.
Yeah.
So do you have a support number there, Mary, without notice, from the top of your head?
A support? No.
Okay.
Oh, 47, sorry.
Oh, okay. All right. So almost 50-50 in Franklin.
Wow.
Correct.
Well,
There
so
you go.
Dave O'Byrne's been calling his electorate well, hasn't he? He
He
knows
has,
his electorate
yes.
well. Anyhow.
I reckon we better give David a go now, Beach.
Yeah,
He's
Killer.
we know he's got a slight view on the stadium.
Yeah, what's your view? What do you make of these numbers?
I'm surprised by those numbers. I'm surprised it's so stark when you wander around the joint and see you see a lot of stickers saying, yes team, yes stadium. You don't see as many of those. Were they red? The red stickers saying no stadium, and that possibly explains to me why Labor sold out of them so early and they haven't done another run. No, I think that's quite extraordinary. I mean, the nature of the result in the seats doesn't surprise me so much because I think we've asserted here for a long time that the further you got from Macquarie Point, the less popular the thing was. But yeah, it's interesting. It just doesn't seem to have captured the popular imagination. I wonder whether the planning process will, educate us enough about the proposal. But I was reflecting on it yesterday, and how long's this proposal been afoot now? 3 years, 4 years?
I think 2022, so it's 3 years.
It's the only thing I know of, from a Mars bar to a multi-million-dollar stadium proposal. It hasn't been affected by inflation. Hasn't gone up $1.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, so we should. This is the solution to the cost of
That's
living
fantastic.
crisis.
Yeah,
we put an
good
Aldi
point.
at Macquarie Point.
Yeah.
Maybe we should sell
The land that inflation
some sort
forgot.
of, stadium currency, sort of as a as a digital currency,
yeah,
like as some sort of
absolutely.
some sort of
Never
hedge.
goes up.
Yeah, sort of a Bitcoin
Like
kind
gold.
of.
Worth $1 today, $1 tomorrow.
A stadium coin.
Yeah.
Would that be?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it just doesn't seem to have captured on these numbers. Hasn't captured the popular imagination, which is not what I would have said. I would have thought that over time, as more detail came out, people became more used to it, more enamoured of it. So yeah, that surprises me a little.
All right. Well, Mary, I think you've put the data together to put together a picture of a typical stadium, and I say this with somewhat trepidation, and on both sides, I might add, a typical stadium supporter and a typical stadium
and Mary,
opponent.
before you answer that,
Yep.
the Premier was in here a couple of weeks ago, and he gave some great answers. I think only at one point did he revert to his talking points, David. It was about the stadium, and he rolled out the story about the mum with the kid that he saw in the supermarket that told him how great the stadium was. So is the Premier onto something with that little story that he tells?
Well, I think if you're between the ages of 25 and 34 with a young family and you live in Franklin, you're more likely to support.
Oh, so he is.
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah, he's
Bingo,
got it. He's
Premier.
got it
Yeah.
one.
However,
So sorry, say that again. So
25 to 34 with a young family and you live in Franklin, you're more likely to be supportive of the stadium.
okay.
Now, conversely, if you are 55 years plus single mum, earning under $80,000, living in Braddon,
David's got a question.
I know.
Okay.
Or-
So,
On this, yeah.
a 55-year-old plus male, retired, living in Bass,
oh, you're not in best
No,
pieces. Okay.
I'm fine.
then you don't support the stadium.
So is there a socio-economic component to this? The better you're doing, the more likely you are to support it? Is that...
Well, the really interesting thing is looking across the demographics. In many respects, the main trend is regardless of your age, gender, how much you earn, your educational level, attainment, and your family circumstances, in the main, the answer is no.
So it's just
okay.
where you live.
But I think importantly, getting back to the Premier's analogy, if you're an aspirational mum, that's what this is saying to me, and you want to see your kids do well, you think the AFL stadium is a fantastic thing because it could lead your kids, give them something to shoot for as a young kid to play AFL. So he was spot on in terms of that. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Really interesting. So so I think to summarise then, stadium's still a stinking pile of poo.
It's one way of describing it.
Possibly slightly less stinky than it was. I think it has improved a little bit.
6%.
No, well, it was
Well,
in the
depending-
70s before.
Yeah.
Still
Yeah.
stinks more in the north and the northwest than the
Okay,
south.
good
No
point.
surprises there.
Yeah.
And stinks more, I think, based on your little summary there, to the extent that there is a distinction, stinks more with older people
Correct.
than it does with younger people.
Yep.
Is that sort of a broad
Yep.
summary?
Yeah.
Yep.
The only other point I would make, Beach, and I want to move on, is that I think it does remind me, the fact those numbers have moved to some extent, is you've got to tell it to sell it.
That's correct.
Disclosure, PR disclosure. We're a PR agency.
Yes.
You've got to tell it to sell it. You
Yep.
tell your story. The government talks about the stadium. They've been talking about it for a year, for better or for worse. The numbers are starting to move a bit better in their favour. Once they start getting bricks in the ground, I think things will move. If they can get bricks in the ground, concrete in the ground, steel pilings, whatever, I think the numbers will move further in their favour. But still a divisive issue, and still, pretty clear why the government lost their majority at the election.
Yeah, look, I think so. And I think the other thing the figures tell me is that you either love it or you hate it. There's no in between. 4%, such a low rate of difference. And that's it. But clearly people are moving if the first private polling you saw was an indication, but still quite a hill to climb, I think it would be fair to say. Anyhow.
Yeah.
Okay, Mary, one of the other things that you did was you tested the Premier's announcement on FontCast around third-party appeals on cracking down on these. What was the response to that?
Before we get there, Beach,
okay.
we just wanted to make sure that the conspiracy theorists out there, all 5 of them, are reassured that there's no, dodgy stuff going on here. No,
Yeah.
no great conspiracy. So, Mary, just for the record, Did you meet with Minister Ellis to discuss this proposal? Did you have inappropriate influence in the process? Have you dodged up the numbers? Just can you clear the record for us here, please?
Okay, so to your first question, yes, I did meet with the Minister for Planning, and it was in my role as CEO of Mary Ann's Island, which I obviously no longer hold. And yes, I did raise this policy. I think it would be fair to say most people know I have a slight interest in planning. But I will say that the first time I heard of the policy being accepted by government was the Premier's interview on FontCast.
So,
Are you taking credit for getting it on the agenda? It had been off the agenda for a long time, and
I think there was a comment that was a gentle reminder.
yeah, well, it was Liberal Party policy since
It was policy
2014.
I mean,
Well,
I was there. I
Yeah.
mean, we took it to election in 2014, and actually, when it was announced, it reminded me, why
that's
did
right.
it never happen?
Well,
You probably
in-
ticked it off the first 100 days
Maybe we
plan.
did, maybe we
Think
did.
about considering maybe
Yes.
I think-
changing third party
Commence
fields.
process.
I think if you look closely at Brian Risby's commentary in the Mercury opinion pages, you'll see why he's clearly worked against it over many years, hasn't he?
In your view.
In my personal view.
Yes.
Anyhow.
Let's make sure you're getting sued, not all of us.
Yes, thank you. All right.
But anyway, to the numbers,
Yes, please.
because I think that that's important. And again, we took the opportunity, because we were in the field with Omnibus,
Yep.
to ask the question of the 1,000 Tasmanians that were polled or completed the survey. And the question, again, was straight back. So here it is. Thinking about development in Tasmania, the Tasmanian government has announced changes to the planning system. They will only allow people directly affected by a residential or commercial development to appeal the planning decision of that development. To what extent do you support or oppose this?
Okay.
So I was actually quite surprised with the numbers. So 44% of those surveyed supported the reform, with 21% strongly supportive and 23% somewhat supportive. 34% were totally opposed, with 18% strongly opposed and 15% somewhat opposed. And then the magical figure for neutral was 23%.
Okay, so 44 for, 34 against, and 23, well, I'm not surprising it's a large undecided given the policy had only just been announced 5 minutes earlier. So
That's pretty
Yeah.
esoteric too. You know, it's like I don't think most people wander around deeply engaged with government planning policy.
I think that's right.
Yeah, but it is. I mean, it is interesting that people actually have a view,
Yeah,
and,
no, that's-
and some of them have a strong view, and arguably they get it and they understand it. I mean, that's what those results say to me.
I mean, I was a bit surprised.
Yeah.
You know, I thought it'd be probably the other way round. That'd be my gut feeling on something like that.
Yep.
And I think the government would be encouraged by those numbers. I think, well, they will be when they find out about them when they watch and listen to the podcast. And I think it, you know, they dropped it into a vacuum, as you said,
Yep.
David. Basically, no one knew anything about it. So the fact
There
that
it
it
is.
appears to be some level of latent, I would suggest, frustration in the community about planning and getting things done in Tasmania, which I think is what that policy and that answer has tapped into. That would be my feeling.
On all the evidence, this affects a very small number of appeals. Most people would not have any involvement in something like this. If they were a neighbour
Yep.
objecting to a development next door, their rights are unaffected.
Yep.
Most people would not personally be involved in an appeal, a third-party appeal against a development, unless they were a member of an activist group or something like that.
That's
So
correct.
for most people, life's not going to change greatly, one would think.
No, that's exactly right. But some would argue that it stops those activist groups from gaming the system and deliberately holding up a development through the processes that are there.
Yeah, I think, is that the Becher says here in the script, BT opines. Is that it? One sentence?
Yeah,
You got some more
that's-
opining?
Some would say.
Well, I mean, look, I can.
I know you've got audios.
I can opine
Here we go.
on this at
We
great
pulled the
degree,
string.
but I mean, well, is it Preston? Jesus. Look, I will say there's a hell of a lot of frustration out there in the business community at the moment that basically the system is being gamed such where development can't proceed. And I think we've got two challenges economically. I know we talked a bit about the budget in the last FontCast, but one of the challenges we have is there is not a lot of private sector investment going on in Tasmania. There is a lot of public sector spending. So when we talk about infrastructure pipelines and all those kind of things, it's all about state spending and then frustration with that process about getting that spending out.
I had a quick look at that $30 billion list actually that was released yesterday, and what's interesting about it is all the things on that list that you would be sure were going ahead, government investment, public spending. But there's things on that list which I looked and thought, that's not the private sector things, like that's not going to happen. That's pie in the sky. That's not going to happen.
Well, I was chatting with the guys from ASIN who are building Robbins Island, and disclosure
that would be on the list.
Yeah, it would be on the list. We don't work for them, but they were talking about the fact that they had via the Bob Brown Foundation about 50 different issues of appeal under the TPC. Right, so they prepare for the hearing. They turn up to the hearing.
They prepare spending
millions of dollars to respond to the appeal. Okay, they turn up. Something like 30 of those were just dropped by the foundation as they're walking in the door. So they have to tell half their people to go. Right, then they go in, and the judge or the administrator or the presiding member throws the rest out. Throws them out. Okay, right? They are now appealing to the Supreme Court saying they've been denied natural justice. So
the Bob Brown Foundation.
Yeah, that's correct. So they've got 50, they throw away 30, the 20 get disposed of, and now they're going to... So it's just holding the process up.
That would be a specific example of what the government's trying to do here.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So in those circumstances, the government's trying to get rid of that appeal to the Supreme Court.
The suggestion was, I think that there's perhaps half a dozen of these a year.
Well,
is that those on the state?
No.
Hang on, this is planning Mary coming out here.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Go.
I'm just like
Educate me.
my lips. Okay, so one thing, and I've seen that stat, and it's really not comparing apples with apples, because you would actually want that that 500 or 5,000 figure broken into of those DAs. How many of them are exempt? No permit required, permitted, and then discretionary. Because when you get to third-party appeals, it's really in that discretionary area, which is the performance criteria under the planning scheme. So really what would be good is for those people who go, it's not an issue, and they use that stat, break that stat down so that we are clearly comparing apples with apples.
I would just make I would have thought, self-obvious point. If it's not an issue, why are they complaining about it being changed?
Yeah, that's a valid point. All right. Okay, so Mary, you've broken down the figures. We've got a bit of a sense of the kind of person that does it. So give us a bit of an idea.
Maybe this could be interesting.
Yeah. Again, look, we're painting a picture. Do we want to paint the picture?
But firstly, before we move on to the typical person who supports or opposes. Let's have a look at it from a regional perspective, because it's similar in terms of percentage support and opposition. So in the south, it's 44% support, 35% opposed. North, 48% support, 31% opposed. In the northwest, it's 39% support and 33%
So
opposed.
really there's no regional differences?
No, but I thought it was actually interesting in terms of looking at it from a regional perspective. And then, so the demographic question. So if you have a postgraduate degree, 30%, and those aged between 55 and 69, 26%.
Is that support? Is that correct?
Support,
Correct.
yeah.
Yep.
Well, no, strongly opposed.
Oh, strongly opposed.
Yeah. Or you're retired or on a pension, 25%, you're going to oppose it, most likely.
Yep.
But if you're in full-time work, 51%, you're more likely to strongly support, and 28% more likely to somewhat support the change.
So I think you're saying, and I don't want to cause myself to be criticised for dealing in,
Do it.
generalities,
Yeah.
but I think you're saying if you're older, more well off, and better educated,
Wonder where we're going with
oppose
this.
this change. Is that right? That sounds a little bit like a certain demographic starting with D and the second word starting with W, which has been bandied around a lot over the last 20 years in Tasmania, David.
God, you've lost me. I'm having a momentary...
Doctors' wives.
Doctors' wives.
The elusive doctors' wives demographic.
Yes.
the older and more well off.
That's right. And people, but if you're a younger person and you just wanted to, a bit like the stadium, have a job, get ahead, earn a living, you're more likely to support the change.
So
But
aspirational.
once you get ahead and get older,
You change your view.
Yeah, you change your
Let
view.
go.
Yeah, well, you know.
become a doctor's wife.
Well,
That's right.
you know, or if you live in Sandy Bay, you don't want the roads too blocked for when you drive down to the yacht club for your drink of a Friday night.
vigorous
Yeah,
stereotyping
that's exactly
going
right.
on here.
Yeah, perish the thought. Anyhow, so well, that's interesting couple of little nuggets out there, isn't it? I think we've probably kicked the debate along a little bit with those kind of things, haven't we? All right. So
Always happy to help.
there you go. Yes, I'm from EMRS and I'm happy to help. Right, EMRS will be putting the full reports on their website later today. FontCast is brought to you by Enterprise Marketing and Research Services, Tasmania's leading and trusted research provider. Thank you, Mary.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Brad.
Great to be here.
And David, thank you for making it through via your deathbed. Great
for
work.
having me.
He looks like he's staged a bit of a recovery.
He's perked up again. He's perked up again.
I've learned some things.
Okay.
It always makes me happy.
Yeah, there you go. Don't forget you can catch us now on our new YouTube channel, FontCast. FontCast is produced and directed by Sam Eichen for Eichen Media.
Thank you, Sam.
And until next time, carry on.